Welcome everyone to New York City to Leaders for the Global Goals. I'm your host, Kevin Edwards. Along with me today, we have Lina Constantinovic, the founding partner of BVC Fund. Lina, thanks for being with us today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Lina, when we heard you do impact investing, we said we got to get her because I'm trying to figure out personally, what is impact investing?
Well, every investment has impact, right? Impact investing usually refers to a type of investment that takes more than just financial return into account in the process of deploying capital for the purpose of a return. So what that means, it could be an investment in a public company, in an early stage startup, it could be a debt instrument, it really could refer to any type of investment that generates positive return for society or positive environmental return in addition to generating financial return. Often impact investing refers to direct deals or investments in private companies like early stage or growth stage companies. So the terminology can be a bit confusing as it can refer to more the broader category of investments that have positive impact, but it can also sometimes be used to refer to direct investments in private companies.
So when you're saying you're trying to return on like social capital or social return or environmental return, what exactly do you mean by that? And what are some of the metrics that you use versus maybe another impact investing firm?
Sure. So I'll give a very specific example so we're not speaking theoretically.
Totally.
And it makes more sense. So for example, we've just made an investment into a company that produces the replacement for styrofoam made out of recycled cardboard. So it's environmentally friendly because it is biodegradable, non-toxic, which means that the styrofoam doesn't end up in the oceans and rivers and all of the interest currently in pollution and how do we prevent pollution in the oceans and rivers. So it has an environmental return.
And it can be recycled again, unlike styrofoam,
That's
right?
true.
Okay.
It can be recycled and it can also, you can bury it in your backyard and it biodegrades naturally without any negative impacts to the environment.
Right. Okay.
So that's one aspect of that particular investment on the environmental side. On the social side, this particular company employs formerly incarcerated men and women.
Oh, okay. So social impact. Okay.
So it gives jobs to those who otherwise have a really difficult time finding jobs after they've come out of the prison system. And so that is an example of a company that's both very profitable, they are generating revenue, they have the interest of market leaders in the space and are in the process of signing hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts. They will be worth many times what they're worth now in the next 3 to 5 years. So financially, it's a sound investment, and it also generates positive impact on the environment in the long term, as well as positive social impact for those that it employs.
So this investment would raise not only just my pockets, but also the community involved and all the stakeholders involved in this business. Is that kind of a definition per se?
Absolutely. So taking a broader view of what it means to make an investment in a company and what the activities of that company are, because the outcomes of the activities of that company are more than just the product or service it sells. It's the impact on the community, as you mentioned. It's the impact on the environment and many other stakeholders that are part of the ecosystem within which it operates.
And so what are maybe, I guess you can't really manage what you can't measure. So what are you measuring specifically? Is it people that aren't going, like recidivism in that example of not going back to jail? Are you measuring maybe like CO2 emissions for something like that? What exactly, maybe throw some more metrics at it.
Sure. So I'd like to just step back for a bit and talk about the purpose of measuring things, right? Measuring things for the sake of measuring, checking off a list is not necessarily particularly useful if you're trying to accomplish certain impacts, long-term impacts. So the way that when I advise family offices or impact investing funds on how to approach this, where we start is what is the impact you intending to have in the world? What is your theory of change? How do you want the world to be different through the process of making the investments you're making as opposed to without? So starting at the level of theory of change, then going to strategy, how do you actually put strategies into place to accomplish those intended goals? And then the metrics are an outcome of that process of theory of change, strategy, and then metrics that give you a benchmark for, are you on track with the strategies you set out?
Oh, okay.
And therefore, are you on track with the theory of change that you've built your fund thesis around?
So if, say, recidivism was a big goal of mine, I want to decrease that. I want to make sure there's less people in jail because it's taking our tax dollars away.
Yeah.
So I could say, hey, that's the goal I want to set. And I'm going to
Yeah.
invest in all these companies that are employing these people who have come from jail. And therefore, over 30 years' time, I can see how large my impact is. Is that kind of a...
Sure. In that specific example, I would encourage you, if I was advising you, for example, on your impact
Please do.
strategy, to think beyond just job creation. Job creation for those who otherwise have a difficult time accessing jobs is one way to achieve that goal. Education, mental health services, there's a number of other factors that are contributing to decreasing recidivism that you may want to invest in addition to job creation, which is certainly an important one.
Right.
So there
Right.
may be
Got
a
it.
broader portfolio of solution categories beyond job creation that you would want to include if your goal was to reduce recidivism through the process of investing your capital.
Is impact investing for everybody? Like, say people our age, like my age, sorry.
Right.
Like, I never once thought about my impact in the world until I'd had this job, maybe.
Right.
And I just wanted to get some quick returns.
Right.
Could this be for me, or is this maybe for an affluent, type of person?
That's a great question. Oftentimes, when that word investing is mentioned, the average person may have the reaction of, I'm not an investor, this is not relevant for me. And I like to remind everyone that everyone is an investor. Most of us have a 401k. If you have a 401k, there's capital that's being invested on your behalf. And you have the agency, and I would argue perhaps the responsibility, to influence how that capital is deployed and ensure that it's actually deployed in a way that's aligned with your values.
Okay.
So even those who are not managing billions of dollars in capital or own billions of dollars in capital have an ability to impact how the investment process works and how capital is deployed, either through the pension fund they belong to, or through the way they vote, or through the way that they make purchasing decisions and signal companies to shift their behavior. So everyone has a role to play and everyone has agency to create this shift.
Is impact investing fairly new? Because I feel like I got on a call, right, with a financial advisor. Say it was
Sure.
AXA. It was. And it was just a buddy of mine. He was just trying to make a call, trying to make a sales. And he's on the phone with me, and he started asking me about all the investment vehicles I could put my money in to have the most money by the time I get to the golden age of retirement. When I asked him about donor advised funds or moving our part of our business into one or ESG, the terminology and the lack of education was very limited from what I understood.
Yes.
So is this a problem too in this day and age in terms of the education of impact investing?
Great question. So the practice of impact investing is not a new thing necessarily. The terminology is newer, probably 7, 8, 10 years old or so.
Okay.
The process of impact investing, there are many who were doing what was at one point called socially responsible investing. There's many different terms for this type of investing over the years. 30, 40 years ago, there are groups that were doing this. There's a group called Social Venture Network of investors
Great
who
group, yeah.
have been doing this for a very long time before the term impact investing existed. So the practice itself has existed for a while. The awareness in the general public is newer, and the awareness in some of the financial institutions managing capital is even newer. so I'll just share a couple of anecdotes around that. Last year, Morgan Stanley, I believe it was Morgan Stanley, sent 7,000 of their employees to upskill around impact investing.
Nice.
And why was this happening? There were clients, significant clients on the wealth management side that the firm was losing because the next gens of those families, the inheritors, would call and say, what kinds of products do you have to offer me on the impact investing side? And the answer was often, I don't know, we don't have anything, or even worse, what is impact investing? And so they realized that in order to meet the needs of their client base, having these skills and products and a knowledgeable team that can actually answer those questions and guide some of their clients through that process was critical. And so this shift is fairly recent. Most traditional financial institutions have seen impact investing as concessionary capital. Do you know this term, concessionary capital?
What is it?
So it refers to this notion that if you're investing for good, or if you're investing
okay, got it. Concessionary.
For environmental returns and social returns, that by default means that you can't possibly be making market rate returns or making as much money as if you are only investing for financial return. And there's, of course, studies and data to show that that's not actually the case. In fact, often, particularly over the long term, you can have better financial returns if you do this. So this misconception still persists to some degree, and there's more and more data and more signal from the market that there's a need for these kinds of products even in the more traditional financial institutions.
And going back to one of the first points you had made, maybe you could look at it like a risk lens for some investors.
Absolutely.
We're just talking about how much the company that's employing the labor or has healthy materials in the environment, probably less likely to go out of business because of those relationships with those stakeholders and the impact in the community.
Absolutely.
But someone defined that as ESG to me, environmental, social, and governance. Do you call it ESG? Is it different than impact investing? What's the difference? Or is it the same?
It's very easy to get lost in the terminology.
Help me out. I'm everywhere.
Yes, absolutely. Happy to. So ESG, which stands for environmental, social, governance, typically refers to investments in public companies. So these are specific screens for public companies to, let's say, build a portfolio with a lower risk profile because you are paying more attention to governance, to environmental risks or impacts, to social impacts. So you are lowering the risk for that investment because you're actually paying attention to more parameters in your evaluation of the potential performance of that investment. So ESG refers to public companies. Impact investing typically refers to private companies, although, as I mentioned before, it can sometimes be used as an umbrella term, hence the confusion between the terminology. But they all refer to having a broader set of considerations in evaluating a potential investment than traditional finance typically does.
I love it. Well, for Lina Constantinovic, the founding partner of BVC Fund, the BVC Fund. Oh, let me get that right sometime. I'm Kevin Edwards, telling you always to keep it real. Thanks, Lina.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.